bodies, grants and subsidies. Before we'll start, let's have an introduction. Deputy Nagardana, Chair of the Public Accounts Committee.
Deputy Karen Wilson, member of the panel.
Ali Awan, lay member.
Deputy David Wall, panel member.
Vijay Kukriya, lay member.
Lynn Hammond, Controller and Auditor General in attendance.
Will you introduce?
Yeah, Richard Corrigan, Chief Officer, Department for the Economy.
Fiona Smith, Head of Business Management and Governance, Department for the Economy.
Thank you. And we'll start with a very simple, I think, question. Can you please confirm which arm's length body, both delivery entities and independent bodies and office holders, are under your remit, your responsibility?
Yes, so there are 5 states established delivery entities: Digital Jersey, Jersey Finance, Jersey Business, Jersey Sport, and Visit Jersey. And states established independent bodies. We have the Data Protection Authority, which some would refer to as the Office of the Information Commissioner, but it's ostensibly all the same organisation. The Jersey Competition Regulatory Authority and the Jersey Financial Services Commission.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. And can you please confirm that for all organizations that under your remit you provide grants?
We don't necessarily provide grants to all of them. So the state's delivery entities, all of those receive grants for their work programs. The Data Protection Authority receives a grant. We are trying to push them more to be reliant on their fee model as opposed to the government grant. The JCRA relies partly on a grant for its competition work, but then it also charges those that it regulates economically. So Ports of Jersey, Jersey Telecom, Sure, and so on. They pay fees to be regulated in those sectors. And then finally, the Jersey Financial Services Commission, they raise their revenue independently in terms of fees to the industry. So where they've had a grant, it's probably more akin to a contract for services. For example, the Intellectual Property Register has been developed and maintained by them, and they received a small grant for the development of that register in line with the government priority. So they don't routinely receive grants for core business operations.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful. And how do you monitor effectiveness of ALOBs that in receipt of grants and subsidies? I think that maybe we'll start with mainly with the delivery. Delivery.
So the delivery entities in some respects are easier. So there's an annual cycle that we work through of them. They present a business plan to government. That business plan has to align with key government documents such as the Island Outcome Indicators, Common Strategic Priorities of the Council of Ministers. And to the extent that we have any sector-focused strategies in government, like a visitor economy strategy or a heritage strategy, looking for alignment to that, there may be certain aspects that entity has to deliver in a given time period. So the business plan would incorporate those areas of work. Some of them have business as usual operations anyway. So Jersey Heritage has an all year round visitor proposition. So they're not necessarily added tasks or tasks that change from year to year. The business plan will detail all of the programme of work that they intend to deliver. That's then assessed by the department in the first instance. So there'll be a grant appraisal document written from scratch that looks at performance of that entity in the previous financial year and for as much data as we hold for that year. So if we were writing, say, the 2026 grant appraisal, we wouldn't have the full annual report and accounts of that entity until probably midway through 2026. So we have to go on some provisional information where it exists. So that grant appraisal will consider, did the organisation deliver its priorities as required last year? What was its success in delivering against its business plan? Are all the corporate governance aspects there in terms of board meetings, board minutes, budget forecasts? What was their financial performance in the previous year? So they've got a grant of X. Did they spend all of that? Did they put some of that money into reserves? And again, that will determine how much of a grant we may wish to give to them in the year that follows. So all of that's written up and then is signed off appropriately in the department within our scheme of delegation. So I have an overall limit as the chief officer, and that's delegated down through directors or heads of service in the department to sign off grants within their own budgetary levels.
Okay, so question, would you give any specific example when the annual plan and annual report were presented and actually in the annual report they didn't meet their KPIs? Example, expected X number of visitors arrived, less numbers of visitors. How does
Yeah.
it impact their grant for the next year?
So it's then looking at causal factors. So why has that outcome not tracked the way it was expected? So typically, I mean, in the government itself, you will see a mixture.
No, very specific question. There was
Yeah.
expectations for X numbers, and we know that it was in their report mentioned that it was less nights spent on the island.
Yeah.
How does it affect grant
Yeah.
going forward?
So you'll see there'll be red, amber, green indicators as to the extent of delivery across any organisation. So they may have missed on one aspect, but they may have delivered on all the other attributes. So you have to look at it in the round rather than just on one single incident. In the case of visitor numbers for Visit Jersey, those have been off their business plan in 2023 and in 2024. Now, there are a lot of reasons behind that. It's a very competitive marketplace for marketing into. There's a lot of attention being sought by different destinations. And Visit Jersey has had a pretty flat budget since its inception. So the buying power that they have over the years has really diminished compared to where they first set out. So they have some challenges there if we were asking them to deliver uplifts against what's basically in real terms a declining level of budget. 2025 is the first year we've been able to deliver a tangible uplift to them through the Better Business Support Package, where they've had an additional £2 million of grant, and we're looking to see how that's been spent and the extent to which that's shifting the dial specifically on the additional money, as well as what they've done with their core
So
grant.
did they need to present you clear plan how this 2 million will be spent?
Yeah, so part of it...
Okay, can you give
yeah.
an example that it will be tangible to understand? So
Yeah.
they got extra 2 million, what you expect to deliver for this 2
Yeah, so
million?
in the case of Visit Jersey, for their additional money on the Better Business Support Package, that was very focused on the support for Bergerac and for having Bergerac filmed in Jersey. So the commissioning of that was done in, I'm just trying to think back now, I think late 2023. The series was then filmed in Jersey over summer 2024. And then we would expect to see that translate into some positive uplift in late 24, 25 in terms of interest in Jersey as a jurisdiction and ultimately translating into visits themselves. But the payment profile of that, you're making the commitment, you're not actually paying out until a much later stage. So the payment for 2024 was effectively paid in 2025.
So in basic term, if we invested 2 million to Bergerac and in 25, 26 will not have more visitor numbers, does it mean they didn't achieve the objectives of the 2 million spent?
So the £2 million wasn't wholly spent on Bergerac. It's been spent on some other marketing activities as well. But we will look at that to say, so that was your campaign, that was a high priority that you established. Show us the value that that's generated, show us the incremental visitors. Now, what Visit Jersey have been able to point to is much more interest in Jersey around the timing of the launch and the screening of the series. It's not necessarily translated as much as anyone would expect into bookings at visitor economy establishments. And that's where they're trying to look now through the conversion process to see why are bookings being lost or potential bookings being lost. So there's interest being generated, but it's not translating into an actual booking.
Okay. Just to understand, how often, how regular do you meet with the CEOs and senior leaders of this organization? Do you have
So
permanent?
there's regular meetings throughout the year on a whole range of topics, but the governance system that we have in place is that there's a half-yearly partnership meeting that takes place. That's the minister and the relevant budget holder. So that's either myself or one of my senior colleagues in the department. And those are described as partnership meetings, where we go back to the commitments that the organisation has made and look to track progress against that and also their progress against their budget in the current year as well. So there are those partnership meetings. Also, in most of these organisations, we attend upon their board meetings as observers. We can't sit on the board because there's a conflict of the fiduciary role of it being a director with that of dispersing the money by way of a grant. So we are board observers. We can take part in the discussion, but can't actually vote on board matters. But that gives us a good line of insight to what's being discussed at the board and the alignment of the strategy the company's taking versus, what the minister wishes to see happen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So what are the key risks these organizations face who receive the grant and subsidies? And what is the process you maintain for the regular dialogue over these risks? And how are you gaining insurance over the mitigation of this this process?
Yeah. So I think there's a degree of commonality that all of them share in terms of the risks that they chart. So we do see the risk registers for each of these organisations. So we can look at what they're charting as corporate risks to the entity itself, and also the extent to which they're tracking risks in a particular sector that they have some degree of exposure to. So Visit Jersey is very exposed, obviously, to the tourism sector. Jersey Business would be exposed across a whole range of different business types. So we see their risk registers and we can draw some common themes from that. I think they're not entirely different from the department's risk register in many respects. So one thing that's a consistent is certainty of funding. The fact that we have a one-year budgetary cycle rather than a medium-term financial plan means that every year funding is up for challenge. And it may, some may think, well, department budgets just get approved by the Assembly and that's that. 2 years ago, was it 2 or 3 years ago, we actually saw a budget cut by a scrutiny amendment in December, which took, a sizable, many hundreds of thousands of pounds from our department budget. That then has to be found from somewhere. So you're then looking to where we spend our money, and our biggest single source of expenditure is on arm's length bodies. So you're looking to try and find some savings in that pool. So we don't have certainty of our budget until the budget's been debated by the Assembly. We can't give that onward certainty to any of the arm's length bodies until we have that ourselves, until the Minister has decided how they then want to allocate the funding that they have available to them. So that's problematic. If we had a multi-year budget settlement, like an MTFP, we could convey that onwards to the arm's length bodies and give them multiple years of certainty around funding. People, in terms of being able to attract and retain the right calibre of people, is a challenge for them. So in terms of the way that our grants are paid, they're paid from the non-pay part of the department's budget. Our budget splits in two. We have a pay and a non-pay element. So pay is our staff costs in the department, non-pay is everything else. And grants come out of that second category. Typically, the staff aspect of my budget goes up by whatever the pay settlement is for the public sector, so it's a neutral action. But my non-pay typically tends to go up at less than the staff increase. When I'm then passing that non-pay part on to an arm's length body, it may mean they're getting a grant uplift year on year of, say, 2%, but RPI and expectations from their staff may be for a pay rise of 3 or 4%. That becomes increasingly difficult for them to solve for over time. So their ability to remunerate and to be competitive, in a war for talent is quite a challenge for some of them. So that's a regularly cited issue. The general sort of macro environment, the economic environment, the trading environment. So for Visit Jersey, they'll be concerned about the state of the economies in proximate locations where we draw visitors from. Jersey Finance will be concerned about the growth globally, where that's coming from and the extent to which that affects Jersey as a choice jurisdiction. And then I think the other one is generally just around sort of suitability of premises. Organisations like Visit Jersey are in a very sort of compact space. It's very cost effective. It's probably not the best working environment physically, I would say. Jersey Business has a similar issue where they are tucked next to our Union Street building. Again, they are sort of packed out in that building, very little natural light. So again, some of those are issues that they would cite as well.
Okay. You mentioned that they are quite reliant on the grants.
Yes.
So when they go through the audit process, do we issue a letter of comfort to the auditors that we'll give that grants?
So what we've generally done is look for them to be able to carry about 10 to 15% of their annual budget in reserves. Okay. That allows for any delays in the grant being issued. So if key documentation is delayed or missing, it gives them a little bit of working capital until the grant can be paid out. And that's been a general rule of thumb that we've worked through and has been discussed, I think, over many years by, I think, previous CNAGs and with internal audit as to what might be an appropriate figure to hold. In the case of our regulators, for example, the JFSC, they hold a much higher level of reserves. Partly there's a higher base budget, but also that's their litigation reserve as well if they got into litigation of a protracted nature. So we allow a level of reserves that we try and manage, but we want to keep that as low as we possibly can. We have given undertakings in the past to say the grant will be paid within a certain period, and instead of having lots of conditions precedent to the grant, we make conditions subsequent, because there should be higher trust in these relationships on the basis they are states delivery entities.
Yeah.
So they were set up by the government for a purpose. There should be a higher level of trust there than there perhaps would be for an event organizer that just comes along and says, can I have some taxpayer money to run something?
Okay.
Could I just follow on from it? What would happen if you didn't fund these organisations through grants? What risk would government carry on that basis?
So because these are organisations that were set up by the states for a purpose, the very title states delivery entities is saying they're delivering work that in some cases would otherwise have to be delivered by the government itself. So some of the work that Jersey Sport does in delivering sports programmes in schools and holiday clubs and so on is work that may otherwise have to be delivered from the public sector.
So how do you balance the cost effectiveness of that? Is there any testing done around whether the model still is delivering value for money or not?
Yeah, so Jersey Sport's a good example there. The review that we conducted of Jersey Sport in 2023 looked at all of that. Because what we were seeing is a degree of divergence, not, I think, through any ill will on the part of government or Jersey Sport. There had just been divergence over time in the purpose that had originally been set up for and where they were at that particular point in time. So we commissioned an independent review, and that's allowed us to sort of bring it all back together and get back onto sort of common ground in terms of the purpose of the organisation and its delivery. So we can take that corrective action from time to time to ensure that they are delivering back in line with the original mandate. And if that mandate has become blurred over time, or indeed if it's become partially extinct over time, then we need to renew that mandate and be very clear what our expectations are.
Sorry, Alex. So you talked about them generating reserves. Do all of them generate reserves?
Generating reserves is more that they've perhaps underspent. So there may be some work that was originally envisaged to happen in their programme that they've either not commenced for some reason, or they've been able to do it more cost effectively than they had perhaps envisioned. And therefore, they've spent less in a given year than they had budgeted to spend. So they have an excess. In the private sector, you would call that profit. And of course, it's registered on their accounts as if they made a profit. Typically, it means they've underspent their grant, or they've perhaps overly raised money from member contributions.
So given that scenario, would there be any point at which you would say, actually, your profit is consistent and we're not going to award you a grant on that basis? What would be the conditions around that?
So what we do is we look each year at the financial forecast for that organisation. They provide us with reforecasts each year. So we see a full year budget for, say, 2026. And then around about April of 2026, we'll see a 3+9 reforecast of that budget. And then in July, a 6+6 reforecast. So we will get a view of the extent to which they're spending through the grant and whether an underspend is perhaps opening up. If it's opening up and we get to that mid-year stage, we may say, well, look, you can't demonstrate a need for all of the money that we originally budgeted for 2026 for you. So we're going to hold some of that second half grant money back in reserve. If you get to a point where other projects have happened or there's other unforeseen expenses that have come through and you need to draw upon it, then we'll look at a request at that point in time. But we're not overly dispersing unless there's got to be an evidence of need there. So we will hold the money back rather than grant it and expect to get it paid back if it's not spent.
I think a good example of that is the Data Protection Authority in 2023. So I think off the top of my head, they received about £70,000, which was considerably less than they would have done in previous years and less than what they received last year, because in 2023, their reserves had got to such a position as an accountable officer, he can't grant money to an organisation who don't need the money. So that was a good example of where money is noticeably held back. Perhaps what's less noticeable is Richard's example of a H2 payment where we may hold back 40, 50, £100,000, which wouldn't really necessarily show up in annual report and accounts because nobody would be aware of what we said we might give you on the 1st of January, and then that little bit potentially that we held back in the September or the August.
I think we will follow up. I really hope we'll probably follow up with written question and to have this, but we cannot see now in our report and accounts how much was held back per each organisation over the couple to 3 years.
Yes, you only see the actual amount spent.
And what are in the reserves currently or for each organization to understand the level of their reserves?
So their reserves would be shown in their annual
their-
report and accounts
okay.
that they
Well,
publish.
But it will be good to have it like in one place that we'll go through.
Yeah, so obviously the annual report and accounts is printed once a year. We are seeing a sort of a more dynamic version of that in year. So if they are forecast to be underspending, we don't want to be giving more money to them unnecessarily. So we will hold it back in reserve in case it's needed rather than to grant it and hope to get it back at some future point.
We'll follow up with
Yeah.
the written question.
That's fine.
Very quickly, you mentioned that they hold up some reserve for the year, but as from the auditor's point of view, they'll want 12 months runaway for that organization as a going concern. So do we give them a letter of comfort on that?
No, we can do, but really auditors aren't necessarily looking for 12 months of expenditure in reserves. They are looking at going concern in terms of the relationship between government and that entity. Some of these entities are either wholly or I think they are all, certainly in the delivery entities, they are majority dependent on the government grant. So what we're looking for, again, when we're considering the position on reserves, is are the reserves in line with whatever the potential winding up costs of that business might be? Because that's a more concerning point, I think, for auditors. What are the winding up costs? So if government suddenly decided not to fund Jersey Finance in 2026, what's the cost of winding up that organisation in an orderly manner? And of course, for the board directors of Jersey Finance, exercising their fiduciary responsibilities as company directors is something they would want to be satisfied with as well. So in reality, those winding up costs tend to be no more than about 6 months worth of the grant. And in the partnership agreements between the government and each of those entities individually, we're required to give 6 months notice of any material change to the grant. So if we were winding up Jersey Finance, if we took that decision today, they would still receive a grant in January, but we would have told them not to do any more marketing or enter into any new commitments, to work through a winding up, and then the balance of the proceeds from the winding up would be paid back to government, and we would take possession of any intellectual property at that time as well.
Okay, moving on. We briefly discussed this, but how do you set and track KPIs for each body? And how do you gain assurance that they're met? For example, Gambling Commission, there is an undertaking of the PAC that this has a requirement to contribute towards health outcomes in tackling gambling addiction. How do you get assurance over whether the organization is meeting that outcome?
Yeah, so the island outcome indicators are an important aspect of what we're asking all organisations to consider. And then we're also asking them to look at the common strategic priorities of the Council of Ministers. It's fair to say that of the island outcome indicators, they're not all equitably split or invested into. Some may have a more pressing need for investment than others. So we want to make sure there's alignment wherever possible with those indicators in terms of how they set the plan. Some have a much clearer correlation than others. So Jersey Sport correlates very well in terms of some of the indicators for people leading active and healthier lives. In something like Jersey Finance, which is advancing the interest and economic well-being of Jersey's finance industry, that would play into one or two outcome indicators, but probably in a looser fashion. You wouldn't see quite as tangible a correlation as you would do in perhaps some of the activity-based measures that Jersey Sport undertakes. But we're in
You can specify about Gambling Commissioner that I mind at the time that we Gambling Commissioner and their contribution towards the health and addiction. Do you know how much they, apart from the page that they have on their website, how much funds they're putting actually into what they're running?
Off the top of my head, no, because it's a relatively small grant in the overall scheme of things, and it's not one of our sort of established entities in terms of the way that it's defined, I think, by the CNAG's office. But if you want to follow up in writing, be very happy to.
Is Gambling
go into
Commissioner
more detail.
under your remit?
Gambling Commission does sit with us, yes, but in terms of the size of the grant, there's a materiality aspect.
But do you know if they invest? Because part of their remit when they were established, it's to support
problem gambling.
Problem of the
Yes,
gambling, and
yeah.
obviously we know that the health service recently spent more funds to support people with gambling addiction and mental health.
Yeah.
So this is complete correlation. do you know if they work and if they contribute?
Off the top of my head, no, but
Okay.
we
We'll
can
follow
follow
it up.
that up in writing
Absolutely.
and I can come back to
Yeah.
a more detailed
Thank you.
response if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked mainly about effectiveness so far, but you've briefly touched on Deputy Wilson's question about value for money, and you've kindly answered in relation to Jersey Sports. Is there an overall process for assessing value for money in grant allocation across all of your entities, all of your ALOs and ALBs?
We don't, so we do our grant appraisal statement, which is our view of the value for money that any one organisation presents, and that's principally around the effectiveness of their delivery against the agreed plan. So when the business plan is presented, it's, you know, picked apart by the department and with the minister. We agree the extent to which we are funding all or part of that business plan, and we commit the funds, and then almost 12 months later, you're looking at what's been delivered. So you're looking for value for money in the sense of what did they set out to achieve, and what's the RAG status 12 months on of the success in delivering that. And indeed, what were the most important of those priorities? So the most important things were red and some relatively minor stuff was green. We'd have more of a concern about the value for money in that one organisation. That, again, is just a leading indicator for us as to what is the contributing factor that sits underneath. So if you look at Visit Jersey, in terms of the last couple of years of visitor numbers being lower than they targeted for themselves in the business plan, funding is a challenge in terms of keeping the level of funding, keeping their place in the market, intense competition from other destinations, marketing in the aftermath of COVID, the challenge around cost of living that we have in Jersey and how that translates into the cost of a hotel room here versus any other location people may be considering. So we then want to get into what are those problems and are there other things that could be done to help to address those in terms of policy and legislation within government or in working with some of those organisations.
So you're identifying that when setting internal targets, the external world matters.
Yes.
So how often and how, what is your process for incorporating changes in the external market into that budget setting process at the beginning?
So the budget setting is, our budget is set really from elsewhere. The Council of Ministers decide where they're placing their overall emphasis financially. So we will have our budget set. And whilst we may feel that there are some areas that do need investment, and certainly the visitor economy is an area for promotion that does need investment, as you'll have seen in the draft budget for next year, there is no more money set aside than there was in 2025 for that purpose. So we're going to have to ask Visit Jersey to try and struggle on as best they can with the levels of grant and public funding that they have. At the moment, they don't raise any money at all from the sector that they serve. Is that an option? Other jurisdictions have debated things like, you know, tourism taxes and so on. Now, generally, we don't like hypothecation of tax receipts, but that may be a consideration. So if we are in a very tight budgetary environment looking forwards, and I believe that we are as an island, we perhaps need to look at other ways of delivering revenue that helps that promotional effort. So those things will be taken into consideration. We will also look at the general economic picture in proximate markets of UK, France, and sort of Western Europe, where Visit Jersey may draw visitors into the island from.
Okay,
Sorry, Vijay, can I just come in?
please.
Just this concept of value,
Yeah.
how do you define that?
We have to take an overall view because Visit Jersey...
Do you for an overall view in terms of all of them or an overall view for each of the entities? as it
per
were?
organisation, yeah. So if I say Visit Jersey, their base grant this year, I think was about 4.78 million, I think, from memory. Can I say that every single pounds of that had maximum effect? No, I can't, because within that
What do
budget...
you do about that?
Well, because within that budget, they will have had to try certain things. They may have tried a stream of advertising in a particular trade publication. They may have tried a particular digital marketing campaign and not had the results that they hoped to get or expected to get. So what we want them to do in those circumstances is to fail fast, you know, to not keep, if something's not working, don't keep, you know, pushing the same issue, try something else. So in that sense, money may go into some initiatives that hasn't delivered the desired benefit, and we want them to learn from that and to move on and to try other things and find that sort of winning formula.
So how is that reflected in your risk profiling given what you know about each of these entities, do you know for sure whether value will be driven forward or will be achieved?
No, because
or is there an appetite to allow some organisations to fail quickly, as you described it?
There has to be a level of risk taken because there is no guarantee of future success for any of these organisations. Now, I would press forward the argument that by having states established delivery entities that are more aligned to the industry sectors and to the skills and experience from those sectors that typically make up the staff of those entities, they should be closer to being successful than asking generic civil servants to be doing this activity instead. So there would have been a reason, predates me, but there would have been a reason why Jersey government's old tourism department effectively was outsourced and became Visit Jersey.
Yeah, so you've anticipated what my next question is, which is why would a government continue to throw money at something like this when clearly there are, touch points along the history of some of these organisations where the risk appetite has been quite high, the tolerance for failure has been quite high, but there's still money being thrown at them.
I would say the tolerance for failure is high. I think that a tolerance for risk is a little bit higher in having those as delivery entities to try other things that you may not try in a core public sector environment. The private sector is generally more risk-taking than the public sector. These states delivery entities kind of sit somewhere in between the core public sector and the private sector. So they're
When do you know when to let go?
We can't let go because we're funding these organisations, so we have to be able to hold them accountable and demonstrate good governance. If we let go, we'd be asking the tourism sector to fund its own promotion. Now, I don't see anyone in the tourism sector saying, we will take that on and we will fund it ourselves. They're very welcome to. They're very welcome to come forward and make additional contributions to Visit Jersey's budget. There's no hands going in the air for that at the moment. So there is a recognition from government, from the Council of Ministers and the particular Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. If Jersey wants, and it does, a successful tourism and hospitality sector, we have to have confidence in our destination and we have to market our destination in a very, very crowded space, the way that pretty much every other destination globally actively markets itself. I was in London yesterday, coming back through Paddington Station to get Heathrow Express, marketing for Saudi Arabia, for cultural experiences in Saudi Arabia. It's everywhere, and that's the Saudi government through its own departments and arm's length bodies marketing its destination. And if we're not doing that, we will be silent and we will suffer the consequences in the long term.
Thank you, Fidji.
Fidji, go back to you.
Thank you. So you've explained the process whereby some of these entities have been created because it was felt that it was more appropriate for them to fall outside of government. How often are those decisions reviewed? Is there a process for reviewing whether any of those functions should be folded back into government? For example, if the organisation is failing fast in the terminology, are there any periodic reviews that say, no, this continues to be the best way to achieve value for money?
Yeah, so Jersey Sport, I used that example earlier on, but that was a 2023 review. Again, we're working in an environment where we can't routinely go out and commission external consultants to review X, Y, and Z. So we have to be quite thoughtful and quite sparing as to how we use that money. But the review of Jersey Sport looked at that organisation as a delivery entity, and the mandate that had been given to it, was the mandate clear enough? So if we felt there were gaps emerging, is it partly our fault for not being clear enough in what we wanted them to deliver? And I think if you read that 2023 report, there is criticism of government. There's criticism of where Jersey Sport were at that point in time. But what I'm really pleased to see is the way that the board and the leadership at Jersey Sport have embraced that and worked with us and turned the organisation to where it is today. There's a renewed board, renewed leadership, much better translation between their activity and the outcomes that they are targeted to deliver, and a good success story that's building there. We will keep that sort of process in reserve for other organisations over time if we feel that there is a little bit of a separation or a gapping beginning to emerge. Separately, we will look at what is quite a crowded space. So I think I said 5, delivery entities. Do we need 5? Could it be less than that? So, we would look at organisations that are maybe meeting the same people and doing some of the same things. That could some of that activity potentially be brought together? So there's some consideration around that ongoing at the moment, and I think you'll know from the Chief Executive appearing previously at Public Accounts Committee that that's very topical in his mind as well, not just about the size of the public sector in terms of the civil service, but also the arm's length bodies that we have created over time and whether that has become too big and too unwieldy.
So there's a formal process reviewing the set of functions and the optimum delivery structure for those, which could result in the elimination of some of the organisations.
Potentially that could be an outcome, yes.
So looking at just an individual in Jersey Finance, for example,
Yeah.
how do you assess that is, as an individual organisation, one, delivering value for money, and 2, the optimum system or the optimum delivery vehicle?
Yeah. So we have a very good line of sight, obviously, to their accounts, their budget, their in-year planning. We've moved Jersey Finance over more recent years away from giving us a list of 150 or so activity-based measures, in terms of their social media interactions. So we don't really need to know that level of detail. Within their marketing function, that's very relevant information and will help them decide how to prioritise money and activity. But we're really looking for some key outcome indicators. So what's the overall health of the financial services sector in terms of funds under administration, bank deposits in the jurisdiction, number of companies on the registry, number of people employed in the sector, the GVA that the sector creates more broadly. Those are macro measures, and clearly if we tipped into another global financial crisis, next month, you would see some of those indicators drop. Doesn't necessarily mean Jersey Finance is doing a bad job, because it may be helping to offset the worst of a decline. In the same way that when there's growth, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing an outstanding job in the growth phase as well. So you have to take some of those measures, I think, with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Rising tide floats all boats. But we look at some of those macro indicators. We look at the feedback they're getting from member firms. Jersey Finance raises around £1 million a year from voluntary subscriptions from member firms, either to paying to be a member or paying to sponsor certain events that Jersey Finance organises through the year. The model in Guernsey is quite different. They collect a mandatory fee through their company's registry, so you don't have a choice but to be locked in as a member of Guernsey Finance. So the fact that so many firms are choosing to pay to be members and choosing to engage in the programme, again, is a good indicator for us of the health of the work that Jersey Finance is doing in advancing the sector.
With respect, that's effectiveness, not value for money.
Well, it's value for money because it's helped to offset the worst of what the public sector may otherwise have had to put in. So if we were funding that organisation in its entirety, it would be a much bigger cheque that we're writing every year.
I could give you a very simple example of a restaurant, for example, that's state-funded, where diners choose to come and pay, 10% of the price of their meal, for example. So it's not necessarily a demonstration of value for money that other people are prepared to make a contribution towards the revenues of that organisation. It's a measure of its effectiveness that the food is okay. In this situation, let's accept for the time being that there are different measures for effectiveness. How do you assure that the value for money is being achieved within, and that it's the optimum model for achieving value for money?
So I would contend that is in itself an indicator of value for money, because these are optional decisions that financial services firms are choosing to be members. They must see value in being part of that organisation and supporting the work programme.
But with respect, that I don't want to get caught up on this point too much. The fact that somebody's prepared to pay for something does not mean that they're not being supplied with value at the cost of the public purse. They could be being heavily subsidised, even though they are paying for it.
Jersey Finance, again, is an organisation where if they were not promoting the financial services industry through a combination, that mixed funding, government would be having to do all of that promotional work for itself to advance the interests of the finance sector. So for me, the fact that we have member firm interest is an indicator, and I said it's not the be all and end all, it's an indicator that others see value in that work programme. Separately, we see the member satisfaction survey. We see the feedback from a number of visits or events that Jersey Finance organises, where there is value in the outreach and the brand visibility that Jersey has in the Middle East, in New York, in Asia, amongst professional services firms, that's bringing business back to the jurisdiction. So it's a whole mix of feedback, from hard feedback through to some stuff that's purely anecdotal.
Sorry, on this same thing, the value of money comes two ways. One is how they're bringing in the positivity, and one is the spend side as well. Now, on the spend side, do we have a look like how the organization is spending that money? For example, going on a event on somewhere, having a 500 quid hotel. Does these things come through you to just have a review to see how the spend has been made? Because this is a cost plus model.
Yeah. So we don't enforce the States of Jersey travel policy
Yeah.
on the arm's length entities. I think that's a good thing, because I think they find extra value from booking directly with airlines and hotels and so on than the arrangement that we have in place as a corporate travel booker at the moment, which often doesn't present great value for us, and we could find cheaper fares by going directly to the airlines at times. And indeed, we have to hold that travel agent accountable ourselves internally. So they will have their own travel policy. We are looking for it to be sympathetic to the public sector in terms of, we don't expect to see people flying business class on a 2-hour flight and things like that. We expect them to have hotel limits that are appropriate, so they're not staying in the Four Seasons Hotel, in any city of the world. So all of that should be in there in terms of proportionality and accountability. And also, we can send the Chief Internal Auditor in at any point to these organisations to run the rule over them and to report back to us. And we would not be expecting to see a report back saying that there are excesses on travel or entertainment or any other factor. On procurement, we ask that any single item above a certain amount is pre-notified to us so that we understand if they're commissioning any work or procuring a project above a certain figure. And that gets a very good line of sight at the board meetings as well as to where money is being spent and where they are performing against budget. Again, sticking with Jersey Finance, that their budget has been squeezed over recent years, so they've had their own efficiencies programme in-house to ensure that they can deliver as much of the output that we want them to do as possible with what is a sort of fairly constrained budget.
And go back to Vijay.
So actually, looking at questions like that in a little bit more detail, the Public Finances Manual has introduced a new provision for ensuring that you approve executive remuneration for bodies receiving more than £250,000 per grant annually. And looking at some of the remuneration packages, so for example, Visit Jersey, 25% of the base, an additional 25% over and above the base package has been paid as a bonus and discretionary payments. Digital Jersey, more than 10% on top, and so on and so forth. We can go through all of these, apart from Jersey Sport, which you mentioned in glowing terms earlier. Every organisation has had a significant amount of CEO bonus payments. What processes do you have for oversight of the base salary, the targets, the KPIs, etc., for achieving bonuses and discretionary payments, and how do you enforce this?
So governance of the organisations is looking at the organisational outputs. Ultimately, the chief executive of the day and their executive team are responsible for that delivery. In terms of remuneration, that's a very recent change to the Public Finances Manual, one that we've played quite a strong role in, taking it to the State's Employment Board for discussion and approval and for implementation with the arm's length bodies. So that only came in 3 months ago or so in a rewrite.
Last month.
Last month in a rewrite of the PFM. So that's a hot off the press item that we will be using now to push down on executive pay appropriately. But I say appropriately, and I think I would underline that word metaphorically, because we have deliberately, again, as I said earlier, set these entities up outside of government for a purpose, for a reason, where they can speak the language of certain sectors, they can attract people in, perhaps free of some of the challenges that would otherwise exist in a public sector environment. That doesn't mean they can rampantly go off and hire left, right, and centre and pay whatever they like, but they have a little bit more flexibility. For example, they're not currently in the straitjacket of a headcount freeze, the way that the public sector is. So they are able to replace vacancies when they come up. I think that's important in terms of being able to continue to conduct that economic promotional activity or economic catalyzed growth in the economy. In terms of the executive pay, however, we don't think this is something where they should be looking wholly to the private sector as a benchmark. So we will be wanting to understand from remuneration committees on the boards of each of these organisations, informal presentations that can be taken back to the State's Employment Board. What is your policy on remuneration? What are the KPIs that are being used to determine executive pay at a level in terms of base pay, but also looking at variable comp aspects as well as to why a bonus was considered to be merited that year versus any other period? Where was the outperformance versus the business plan?
Okay, so that's in terms of their communication to you. Two questions arise out of that. One, in terms of transparency, what plans are there to publish these or oblige them in keeping with remuneration policies for public companies or listed companies? And the second one, so you have a level of visibility, but what control, what negative, positive or negative control do you have over those elements?
So to answer the first point, there is visibility in the annual report and accounts of each of these organisations that is in the public domain. So again, from the Comptroller and Auditor General's recommendations in previous reports, there is now much improved transparency on the annual report and accounts from the organisations that we've been speaking of today. And that includes executive pay, includes the levels of executive remuneration and overall board remuneration. That's for those that are at board level. Now, it doesn't report underneath that, so there may be other senior managers in those organisations. That's not currently reported, but nor is it reported by the States of Jersey in our annual report and accounts. So my salary would be in the public domain, but Fiona's salary, quite rightly, wouldn't be in the public domain. And that's pretty commensurate with what you would see in PLC reporting elsewhere. So the second part of your question...
We'll come back onto the second part.
Right.
So I just wanted
Yes.
to confirm with you that
Yeah.
in that case, what you're saying is that we're currently complying with all of the CNAG's recommendations in relation to transparency on
these
senior
organisations,
roles.
on executive pay, yeah.
Okay. And so the second part was to do with influence, what control you
Yes, yes. So the control is a new control that we have through this now being the Public Finances Manual, the obligation that those organisations have to have executive pay approved formally through the State's Employment Board. So that will be the controlling measure. The State's Employment Board will have a view and could ultimately choose to reject that level of pay. We would then reflect that in our discussions about the grant to that organisation, and it would become quite a sore point if that organisation was to ignore the position of the minister, in particular, regarding a particular decision on executive pay. So if it was determined that Chief Executive A should not receive a bonus, and they proceeded to pay a bonus, that would be a significant problem in the relationship between the chair of that organisation and the minister, and could lead to us taking more radical decisions around the future funding of that organisation.
And just so I've got this firmly in my own mind, so the provision is new as of last month, and therefore you would anticipate it first to come into action with the grant conversations taking place for next year's grant.
Yes.
And then we would see it reflected in 2027 at the earliest.
Yes, I mean, again, we could update PAC, I'm sure, sort of mid-year next year as to how that's progressed in practice. But in terms of what's generally in the public domain for consumption, as I say, it's significant progress having a much more detailed annual report and accounts for each organisation published. But the first time you would see it in a published version for general consumption would be 2027.
Based on 2026.
Actuals, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Could I
Thank you.
just say, in terms of complying with the CNAG recommendations, we do, as Richard as the accountable officer, make sure that his arm's length bodies are publishing their annual reports online, and that we do encourage them to attend the workshops, do the best practice, but we would need to come back to you and say, do all of our 7 publish in terms of gender breakdown, as well as their remuneration, as well as their boards. I wouldn't say hand on heart, off the top of my head, all 7
They're not.
do,
No.
but we do know all 7 do publish their annual reports.
So we've seen a marked improvement, I think,
Yeah.
in terms of the best practice recommendations that were made. I think there's a journey of improvement. Some are further down that road than others.
And I think this year's 20th anniversary recommendations has reset that for them. It gives us good additional support and evidence to say, we've already asked you previously to comply with the recommendations. This is now another request because it's still not being done.
If you could give us a detailed update on that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we move on to duplication and service delivery.
Yeah.
So can you advise the PAC, how do you identify overlap or duplication between ALBs and between ALBs in your department? What action do you take to remove duplication or join up work? And if possible, can you give an example?
So I think we've had a fairly high degree of individuality hitherto, you know, in terms of the organisations that have been created. They've been created for quite a specific purpose, and they've got on and delivered generally in that space. I think where we are now, if I look particularly at Jersey Business and Digital Jersey, we have a couple of organisations there where there is a degree of overlap. Yes, there is an emerging digital community, tech community within the island, but it's only ever going to be modest, one would say, because there are certain factors that we don't have here in terms of the universities and the research institutes and so on. We're not a Cambridge or a Silicon Valley and so on. So there are some challenges there that will naturally impact that. But clearly the biggest opportunity for the economy is in adoption of new technology in all walks of life. Now that brings Jersey Business very much into the picture as a SME sort of accelerator business advisor. And a key part of the advice we would expect them to be giving to businesses in terms of how to be more productive is the embrace of technology. So what we don't want to see is two organisations sort of pushing overlapping agendas in that space. So that's something that's an active discussion at the moment with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development as to, you know, would we prefer to give a much clearer mandate to one of the two organisations? So ask one to, you know, say, we want you to back away and for this one to come more to the fore. Or do we leave things as they are, or do we potentially merge organisations together? So those are all options for consideration. There is no decision at this stage as to where we actually go.
And do you want to ask?
Could I, what, do you know what's needed
In
terms of what you're trying to create around some of the harmonisation or the duplication? Have you got in your plans a real clear view about what's needed and why it's needed in the way that you're proposing to?
So some of that's in feedback that we will get from the business community, but yeah, there is I think the Chief Exec talks about it, sort of Parkinson's law, that, you know, you have those organisations out there, they will find work to fit the resources that are available for them. So you sometimes need to take a more interventionist view as to what resources they have and what you want them to do with those available resources. And that's really where we are at the moment on particularly Jersey Business and Digital Jersey. We think with Visit Jersey, there's a clear mandate there in terms of tourism promotion, being a destination marketing organisation that is quite unique. Of course, they get some spin-off benefits if Jersey Finance are promoting over the horizon about the merits of Jersey, or if there's other aspects about, agricultural exports and so on, people have affinity. But fundamentally, as a DMO, Visit Jersey, it has that mandate. We would say the same for Jersey Finance. They are quite uniquely placed. There are some overlapping aspects there on fintech with Digital Jersey. I think Digital Jersey are trying to encourage the development of financial technology and regulatory technology solutions from within the island. From Jersey Finance's perspective, what they're looking for is what's the impact of fintech on the sector as a whole, recognising that some of the larger businesses that are already here, they're not going to necessarily create the solutions in Jersey. Those solutions will be created internationally and applied across every office that particular organisation has around the world. So in that sense, they'll be takers, not makers of those technologies.
So just examples here, I've got a list of organisations: Art House, Jersey Arts Centre, Opera House and Jersey Heritage.
Yeah.
I mean, they all have their own boards, they all have their own organisational structures. Does it not make sense that they actually combined some of that? That would be a much more effective use of resource if you had one overarching body in the arts.
Possibly does, but these are organisations that weren't set up by the states. They're not states delivery entities, so there's a
Right.
very different mandate there. So it'd be like saying that, you know, Battle of Flowers and Jersey International Air Display are events organisers.
Sure.
Should they merge together into a single event? So no, we haven't taken that view on some of those. They're generally smaller grant holders, but also they're not necessarily organisations that were established by the states of Jersey.
Right.
Jersey Heritage, I think, is the only one where I think I would agree with your view that they are probably more in the state's delivery entity. They weren't formally categorised as that, I think, in the CNAG's recommendations.
I'm interested, because I'm mind about the time, but you're saying this, they don't establish at the same time when you're looking into the art house, their total budget in 24, 1.6,
Yeah.
and the government 1.196. We're talking about that substantial. So without government grant, this organization will not be able to operate. So if you're talking about art center, it's 1.59, 1.6, and we have a major grant there. So most of these organizations that we're asking are receiving majority, so they're operating major on the public money.
Yeah.
This is why the question, how we making things more efficient.
Yeah, but again, so in Jersey Arts Centre, they're operating a venue. That venue has maintenance costs and so on. They bring together a programme of events over the course of the year. Jersey Opera House, again, you know, it's funded, it's an event space. So, you know, do you say that Jersey Opera House and the Arts Centre should come together? You know, they're all valid discussions, and there'll be many different points of view on them. Some that are just very defensive and not prepared to consider alternatives. Some that would say they actually serve very different purposes in terms of their size and their audiences and so on and so forth.
But isn't the question, Richard, if you're the steward of the public finance that is funding these organisations, at what point do you call this in terms of trying to actually, to pick up VJ's point around, drive that value proposition more? It just seems very transactional at the moment. You give money to an organisation and it just gets on and does what it does. What we're concerned to test is, what is it that happens with your oversight and your scrutiny of the performance of these organisations that improves the value proposition for islanders and delivers real benefits and cost effectiveness?
So I think we spent most of the last hour articulating exactly that, what we do to understand what these organisations are going to do in the year that follows, what indicators or outcomes they are targeting, whether those align properly to the Council of Ministers' priorities and to the Island Outcome Indicators.
But the question is,
and if they do, they get funded.
It carries on every single year. And what you've described to us today is that there are some conditions under which these organisations operate that are quite tenuous, quite risky in terms of the way in which they're funded at the moment. And I suppose what we're trying to understand is, if a grant is awarded to an organisation, which you've eloquently described, at what point does the Department for Sustainable Economic Development take stock of the fact that the sustainability of that kind of funding for an organisation like this has to stop? You're alluding to some of the dynamics around Jersey Business and Digital Jersey in terms of overlap and duplication. Why do you not apply the same methodology or the same approach to the stewardship of that public money
We apply
in relation to
it
others?
across the board. It's the same philosophy and it's the same approach and it's the same grant appraisal process that we follow. So it's the same corporate governance that we apply universally. There may be different individual push and pull factors in each sector, but it's applied universally. It's applied in the way that we give grants for events. We look at the credibility of the organisers. We look at the outcomes that they are targeting in terms of the quality of the air display or the number of people engaged through Battle of Flowers. So all of those factors are looked at in exactly the same way. I think my point was more, there are organisations I didn't categorise these organisations as those that are empowered in law, those that have been created as delivery entities. There are those that receive grants for other reasons. There are some that receive grants that maybe are more of contract for services across the government as well. For our purpose, we put them all through the same process in terms of assessing value for money and alignment with the strategic outcomes of the Council of Ministers.
Yeah, I have the last question. I know that we're a bit over time. You mentioned that you are looking, and I think that you mentioned we will. So from 2023, there was no strategic deep dive review into any of the, since Jersey Sport, was no review taken how it can,
There's
how
been
the
we've
services.
not commissioned any external
Yeah,
reviews.
or even
since the
it
Jersey
hasn't been
Sport
that.
one.
So now, what are your plans? And you are looking into all this organization and its ongoing conversations for the last year and a half that we need to do something to ensure there is value for money and effective delivery and avoid duplication. When are you planning to conduct reviews or any of them? And when the Public Accounts Committee and government and actually public can see the outcomes of this review? So do you have a plan?
So the Jersey Sport review was...
No, leave it to Jersey Sport review. It's done.
But
2023.
It was, but importantly, that was published. So that was published and it said the criticism of government, the criticism of Jersey
When
Sport.
the next review coming? 2023, 2 years ago.
Yeah, so there's nothing planned at this moment. And in fact, we're not able to go and commission external consultants at the moment because of a freeze on the ability to commission consultants. So we've done an independent review in 2025 of Visit Jersey within the department. We've taken a view over and above the grant appraisal process that we would go through and that I described earlier.
Review, where is the duplication? Jersey Sport, Digital Jersey,
there
it's
is-
on
there
the
is
map
none.
for a long time.
No, but it's not. That's not in our department business plan. There's nothing in our department business plan to say that we're doing a strategic review of arm's length bodies, either individually or collectively. So that I don't know where that's come from, but that's not on the stocks. We review each of these organisations individually as part of the grant appraisal process, and where we feel the need, because there is evidence of some gapping, as I said with Jersey Sport, we commissioned an external review at that point in time. We don't have a mandate to be able to go out and commission further external reviews. And actually, in discussions both in the department with colleagues and with the minister, there's no identified need at this point of time with any of these delivery entities to go out and commission a specific review of those entities.
Yeah, the reference you were asking where it came from, I think it was in the CEO's letter to the PAC where he states that accountable officers should consider carrying out structured reviews of any or all arm's length bodies for which they're responsible. And the requirement for the annual assessment remains.
Yes, and that's, I've already described that over the last hour, that we do that review on an annual basis. The requirement is for a structured review. It's not for a strategic review of all of the organisations.
And it's
So-
to
so
consider
each-
as well.
Yeah, so each one is reviewed on an annual basis in terms of its delivery and also its ongoing merits to exist as an independent organisation, and recommendations would be made from that. But there's nothing else above that, other than, as I said earlier, the mandate that the chief executive has to look overall at the size and shape of both the public sector and delivery entities that attach to it. And I think that's something that's been sort of well
So
written up
you're saying it's
elsewhere.
with the chief executive, not with yourself?
The chief executive is looking across the whole of government because we're talking about just 5 delivery entities and 3 regulatory bodies. There are many, many other bodies that sit outside my department that government either grant funds or has contracts for services with. Those all need to be considered. You've got the Care Commission, the Children's Commissioner, just to name 2 others that are out there that would be in the auspices of that broader review that the chief executive has got underway.
So just to be clear, I'm sorry about the time. So the annual reviews you will undertake as a department.
We do undertake and have done for
and
many
have
years,
done. Okay. And the requirement for a more detailed, structured review in the way that Jersey Sport went through, you don't have any plans to do that with any other
No,
entity?
not at this stage, no.
Is there a reason why?
Because we do, as I say, we do it when we feel there's a gap emerging. So in our assessments each year, if we feel that that organisation is drifting away from the priorities that the Minister has set or that the Council of Ministers has set, or if we believe there's a fundamental gap in delivery, then we would look at whether an independent review is merited and commission it accordingly.
Or
But we don't
equally
have anyone else that
duplication.
fits into that stage at the moment. And from a duplication perspective, I've described where we see potentially some overlap in Jersey Business and Digital Jersey. That's getting some desktop consideration from us at the moment and some preliminary discussions with the Minister around where they may wish to go.
I think the key thing there, and Deputy, you talk about requirement. There's not a requirement as such. So the PFM says the accountable officer should consider whether a structured review should be carried out. So we do consider.
Yeah.
And externally, we don't consider it necessary at this stage because of the skill set and the experience. And if you like, the value for money of doing it in-house would be a lot cheaper.
There are many things in the Public Finances Manual that are should do, they're not must do's, or things that we should consider. And the language is very nuanced as to whether.
Just quoting
So
back.
Yeah.
So if I could just quote the relevant section, responsible accountable officers should consider arrangements for approval of
Not
executive.
must, yeah.
And this could include, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. It's number 5. Right. Responsible accountable officers should consider carrying out structured reviews of any or all arm's length bodies for which they're responsible and listed in this section, with the exception of specific state-owned entities, on either a periodic or ad hoc basis. These reviews should include structured and strategic considerations of value for money.
So as I've explained, first of all, it says should, it doesn't say must. We do this on an annual basis, and there's a big difference in the language when you talk to those that write the Public Finances Manual. Should is a recommendation, it's not an action
understand.
you must follow.
That's
So
If there is a recommendation, do you need, I assume you consider the recommendation and make a decision?
we do the structural reviews because
We
we
need to
do the
start
structural review every year. And as I say, if that's identifying gaps, we would then look to doing a more strategic piece of work commissioned externally, as we did with Jersey Sport, where a gap had developed over time and needed to be corrected. We are not at that stage in our assessment of any of the other organisations at this point in time. If we were, we would look to go down that same route of doing a strategic review and having that commissioned independently to put ourselves up for assessment just as much as the subject organisation.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think that thank you for extra time, and probably we needed to arrange a bit more to go deeper, but we would follow up with the questions.
Please, yeah.
Because I'm sure that you sense that the concern of the committee that there is, and we'll continue conversation between should and must and duplications that currently committee feels there is in the system. And we will, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your explanations.
That's